Hello, my name is Jay Reckward, and I'm the Wandering Fantasy author. I write epic fantasy, sword and sorcery, and urban fantasy, and I host a show on YouTube called Pondering the Orb. Today I'm joined by David C. Smith, a legendary author of the sword and sorcery genre, who's here to discuss his new novel, Sometimes Lofty Towers, which will be available through Brackenbury Books after a successful backer kit campaign. So before we begin, please like and subscribe, and let's get started. David, thank you so much for joining me to discuss your new book, Sometime Lofty Towers, a sword and sorcery novel that you'll be releasing through Brackenbury Books after funding a successful backer kit campaign that we're discussing today. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm happy to be here to talk about it.
And congratulations on the successful campaign. It's really great to see it fund. And as I was telling you before we started recording, I've read the novel and it's fantastic. People are in for a
I,
great adventure.
I really appreciate that. So far, the folks who've read it seem to like it very much.
It
And it was kind of a labor of love on my part or a work of the heart or something. And so I really like hearing that from folks. I did some good work.
Absolutely. So let's dig into it.
Sure.
Sometimes Lofty Towers presents us with the character of Hanlin, a warrior and a veteran of a former conquest to expand and colonize a fantastical western land at the behest of powerful forces. He is a widower struck by a deep conflict and sense of wanderlust in his latter years that drives him back westward in search of something to fulfill a longing. The narrative does a really fantastic job of unfolding for the readers. Where did you first come up with the character of Hanlin?
There's a multi-pronged answer to that. In that I've always tried to give any characters I write about, but especially in sword and sorcery, um, some depth, or some depth, some dimensions to them, some layering. uh I always go back to comparing the western detective stories. There's no reason why genre fiction can't have you know characters that have some depth to them, really. I ask myself when I'm writing a character, would an actor want to play this character?
Mm.
Is there enough there for an actor to dig into and find something to contribute? So he kind of kicked around in the back of my mind. The emphasis for this story kicked around in the back of my mind for a while.
Mm.
Um, it actually came to me back in the '70s or early '80s. There was some goofy made-for-TV movie that was called the Over the Hill Gang, and it had a bunch of old-time Hollywood stars in it, like Chill Wills or somebody. They were going to play old-time bank robbers or something. I never watched it, but I thought it was it's a cute idea, you know. So I thought, well, what if I dealt with a couple of guys who are at the end of the road and they have some history behind them, and not necessarily in a comedic way, but look at it that way. And then that led to thinking about very quickly, the Wild Bunch, the Sam
Hmm.
Peckinpah movie. It was rolling around back there. But quite frankly, until my father died, I didn't sit down and start doing something with it. Um, he died of asbestosis,
Mm.
and if anyone listening knows about asbestos or the mineral, the fibers of it get in your lungs. We can't expel them. You die of cancer. You die of asbestosis. You die of mesotheliosis. I'm
Hmm.
mispronouncing it. It's horrible.
Right.
Um, my dad was an estimator. He estimated the cost for construction and everything. So a lot of the guys that he knew who worked in the field died a lot sooner than he did. Um, he lingered on for 16 and a half years, going through surgeries and so on. And he was, I never tired of saying this, he was just a great guy. He had grown up in the Depression. He's kind of a country boy. I had his 22 for him. My brother has it now, but he could literally out there in the fields shoot quarters out of the air with that 22 rifle. I mean, whoa, 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 Um, he served in World War II. He came back and married his high school sweetheart. He had three perfect children. I mean, look at me, right? Perfect, lovely children.
Absolutely.
and and built the house. He was a builder. He built the house we all grew up in and everything. So he had this ideal, like, post-war, white American life, and it was what
Hmm.
everyone would assume. And he had played by the rules, and he was a good guy. And the whole system then turned against him because once he got sick and the workers he knew got sick, um, lawyers preyed upon them. They had to file lawsuits to get any sense of justice. You still see the ads on the commercials on TV today, about
Right.
mesothelioma and lawyers going after that. And he was extremely bitter about that, because he had played by the rules and he was a straight up guy. He was a regular guy. And it just infuriated him, and there was no good reason for it, because he was honest and played by the rules. We're going to do that. So he, for 16 and a half years, he walked around. He was just boiling with tension. He was holding in all this anger and stuff. And, he went for some therapy and then he'd walk away from it. He's an old school guy. He'd go for some therapy somewhere. And so he was holding all that within him. And when I started putting down ideas for the novel, deciding finally to maybe I should do something with it, a lot of that material in the first chapter, where he's brooding, the stuff that seems kind of grim dark, those thoughts,
Right.
the melancholy stuff, that came from me putting down my thoughts when I was thinking about my dad.
Right.
And Hanlin, I wanted to give Hanlin some sense of relief from what he was carrying around. For him, I concocted a whole different set of circumstances. But it's my dad walking around with this ferocious anger, and rage against a system that had betrayed him. And that's where it started from. That's a long answer, but that's where it started from.
That's a
Yep.
fantastic answer and actually explains a lot of that first chapter, as you mentioned.
Yeah.
Um, and, and kind of continuing on with the book, one fascinating aspect of your new novel is the world building. Throughout the novel, Hanlon clashes with these feelings of guilt and responsibility and struggles with a sense of purpose tied to his past actions as a soldier. But from Umber to Titan, or Titan, please
Titan. I
connect.
say Titan. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And to the further bounds of the frontier, we we're also dealing with complex discussions, sometimes debates around topics of colonialism, imperialism, and identity that are rendered in some pretty profound ways. Why were these themes and topics important for you to explore through the world Hamlet inhabits?
I guess just because I'm the person that I am in my own interests in reading and thought, um, I do tend to give at least my most important characters, especially the protagonists, thoughts to think, philosophies to kind of mull over. I do that in my own life. I like reading philosophy. I like reading
Mm-hmm.
reading thoughtful stuff. So it's natural, I guess, it's going to go into some of my characters, and particularly for someone in Hanlon's situation, the using the borrowing, what do we call it, the motif, the idea, the setting of the European, conquest of the American continent.
Mm-hmm.
It's been used so often for so many insightful things, and so I went with that.
Hmm.
I grew up. My dad liked Easterns. He liked the Revolutionary War period, the colonial period.
Right.
And in fact, where he grew up in Western Pennsylvania wasn't too far from Fort Necessity, Pennsylvania, and
Oh,
that's a little
okay.
fort.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was one of the first forts. I think Washington built it.
Right.
And lost there the battle against the French and
Right.
Indians. But there it was, and so I was conscious all along of that history of that region where I grew up in Northeast Ohio. And in fact, a buddy of mine when I was a kid, Eric, and I would go out, and we really could just go digging around in the woods and in the fields and come up with spearheads, the
Mm-hmm.
arrowheads. They were right there. I mean, so that instilled in me like an appreciation for these cultures and stuff. I like reading about ancient history. Uh, so that's basically where they came from. My appreciation of indigenous peoples, people who don't thieve and steal and aren't greedy. They work with their surroundings. They appreciate which nature has. And in our technological era, in the Anthropocene era, whatever, um, we see more and more of this kind of rape, pine, and pillage, and there's no reason for it except to make more money. And I
Absolutely.
like money. Everybody likes money. We all want to
Right.
make some money, but there's a middle ground.
Right.
And so where we're doing damage to, the Kieran in the book, the Earth Mother, the Mother Earth.
Mm-hmm.
This is who gave birth to us. This is who we're going to go back to. Have a little respect. So that's where a lot of that came from, and a lot of the philosophy then contributes to that. Who are we? Why are we here? Where are we going? They're genuine. These are questions of genuine concern for all of us. If
Right.
we open that little box, and start asking these questions of ourselves.
Absolutely. So I'd like to step away from Sometime Lofty Towers and its great story to discuss sword and sorcery in general. You've
Sure.
been publishing in the genre since the 1970s during a time yeah. But
Gosh, I know.
Brian Murphy wrote this great genre history book called Flame and Crimson, and
It's good.
he defines this era as the start of a down point or the down period of SNS literature. Considering where we are right now in 2025, where it seems sword and sorcery is once again on the cusp of greater awareness and readership with new magazines and new presses that are eagerly exploring the field, there's obviously been a lot of growth and a lot of change. Um, Considering your tenure in the genre and how it has changed with the times, how do you measure the sword and sorcery scene as it stands today compared to when you got started in the 1970s?
Yeah. Um, Another couple double pronged answer for that. When when I was writing and just getting into it, looking back, it seems to me it was kind of towards the tail end
Hmm.
of what had been a boom. So if you look back at the 60s,
Hmm.
and Fantastic Stories magazine, when Seeley Goldsmith was the editor and publishing John Jakes, and there were so many paperbacks. The mid list, the books that
Hmm.
would fall off the rack in the drugstore or whatever. Um, there was so much of that stuff, and reprints of some of the classic material, particularly the Howard stories and Lance, the Lancer editions, but all kinds of stuff. Um, that that kicked off a super boom of interest in sword and sorcery. So that was I was still in junior high school, or maybe just started high school. We're talking 66, 67,
Right.
and it's that was a bubble for the next 5, 6, 7 years, maybe 10 years. I mean, it really was a bubble, and publishers just gave money to anybody who could turn out stuff that had barbarians, in armor and swords and half naked babes on the cover with monsters and stuff, and I think that wore out its welcome pretty quickly because so much of it was repetitive, and frankly kind of stupid, you
Hmm.
know. Um, so it wore out its welcome pretty quickly, and we know there was a reaction against it from some publishers and editors.
Right.
It's like, if this is all there is, then let's start looking other directions. And that coincided um, with some women editors entering the field, like the
Hmm.
woman editor who looked at Dick Tierney's and my Red Sonja novels. We wrote those in the late 70s. They came out in the early 80s. Um, a bunch of new women who were writing really good stuff, Tanith Lee and some
Hmm.
other writers. So there was a shift. Big part of that was the doorstopper fantasy, sort of Shannara, and this huge amount of Tolkien-esque fiction, which is not sword and sorcery as we know,
Right.
but that's the stuff that was attracting readers, a much broader audience than sword and sorcery. And so those are the kind of books that by the early to mid 80s were taking over. Um, in a way, I don't blame them. They're in business; they need to publish stuff that's going to attract a readership. Here's the second prong to the answer. I'm actually writing a book now about it's like a survey of the current where we are currently with sword and sorcery fiction.
Okay,
Um,
cool.
it's called. I've been at it for a couple of years. I know Bob McLean at Pulp Hero Press is going to bring it out. The plan is for later this year. I don't remember if I talked to him about the idea or if he mentioned the idea to me, but I wound up going back, and it's in Word doc now. It's in manuscript. So the first, I don't know, 60, 70 pages is something I review. Howard, the early sword and sorcery, Fritz
Right.
Leiber, all of these authors. And there's a section where I talk about that period in the late 70s, early 80s. And my take on it is that, they kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater because when you look at it, there was a great deal of really good sword and sorcery work coming out then, just starting to poke its head up. Women writers, writers
Hmm.
of color, particularly Charles Saunders,
Yes.
um, Dick Tierney and I were doing Red Sonja. I just go on and on with it. Marion Zimmer Bradley. There was the what was the series? Thieves World.
Right.
There was so much that was coming out, but it wasn't generally a push behind it. There's a little bit here, a little bit there. It was those of us who had started out writing for the fanzines in the late
Hmm.
60s and 70s. That's where I came from. That's where Charles Saunders came from. That's where Del Schweitzer came from. I mean, you go down the list, Jessica Salmonson, all of us. Um, and so a number of us were able to get some book deals with the paperbacks and stuff, but then it all shifted to the Tolkien-esque stuff and everything else. So it's too bad, as I say in my book, that it needn't have been. There was room there for somebody to keep publishing some heroic stuff, some out and out sword and sorcery, but that's not what happened. So my view of it is that everything was quiet for a long time. There'd be an occasional, shot across the bow or something. Mainly
Right.
it was DeCamp and Carter, and then DeCamp's control, frankly, of the Conan, copyright. So that all we had was clonins, as they call them,
Right.
the
We'll talk about them a little bit later. Yeah.
yeah. So there was that, and the original Howard stuff didn't come back until I think early '90s, mid '90s. I think those are
Right.
the editions that I have now that I use. Um, so it's almost as if there were people out there who enjoyed the fiction. They went back and read the authors of the pulp era material. They read my stuff where you could find it. They read
Hmm.
other authors where you could find it. Um, and I picture them like passing around beat up paperbacks or something, or finding them on Abe Books or something online, to find these old paperbacks. But there was an interest there, and the fire hadn't died out. The embers were still warm, and then I kicked it back in. So compared to where we were when I started out, um, this is wonderful. We
Right.
have print on demand now. We have a million small independent publishers. This is kind of the way I like it. You froze for a second. You still there?
Yeah, I'm
Oh,
still
you're good.
here. Yeah.
Um, okay. The reason I say kind of like it this way is because it kind of keeps it kind of like as a club, the way that
Right.
science fiction was, in the 30s and 40s and 50s. The people who love it love it. You know, the difference is nobody can make a living writing this stuff now, but times the world's changed completely. But it's among us. It's among those of us who really love this fiction, talk about it intelligently, write it. A lot of us writing it really, really well these days.
Hmm.
So that's what comes out in my book. And I love Robert E. Howard as much as anybody, and Kane, and the classic characters. But we have a whole generation of people out there now who are writing sword and sorcery, and they're taking it in every direction imaginable. I mean, it's like it's in Mongolia. God knows how many stories in Africa.
Right.
Um, we have authors from everywhere. We have gay writers. We have women writers. We have, I don't know, people with six. I don't know. Everybody now is finding something in this genre to explore and use to turn out really good stories that explore concepts and identity. If that's not a dirty word, and
Yeah.
offering really, really interesting takes on the genre. One last thing quickly here. That's why I compare it to like the way westerns were in detective stories. They could have stayed the way they were in the 30s and 40s. I mean, science fiction could have just kept doing that. It didn't. We got intelligent writers to come along who took it in many different directions. And I truly think that's what's happening with sword and sorcery now. People are using it as a vehicle to explore whatever interests them as an artist. So it's a good thing.
I fully agree. I do want to follow up on something that you said about
Sure.
the shift from sword and sorcery to more Tolkien-esque fantasy. Was that just a publishing decision that was made, or was there a shift in the readership? Because I'm always curious about how readership shifted with the times, especially when it applies to genre
Yep,
fantasy fiction. So,
yep.
what do you think caused that shift?
That's kind of a chicken and egg question, but maybe not quite. Because we know that it really started. Um, who was it that put out the adult Valentine, the adult fantasy series
Right.
that Lynn Carter came up with? My understanding is that once Tolkien was reprinted, um, and was enormously popular,
Hmm.
that's when, and we're talking like late '60s, early '70s. Here, I was just starting college, and Carter sold Ian Valentine the idea. Everybody loves this great fantasy trilogy. There's some more great fantasy out there from back in the day. Let's do William Morris. Let's
Right.
do, the whole, we know the list, of these authors. Um, and I'm really grateful that he did that. My understanding is that they didn't do quite as well as Valentine the publisher hoped. In the
Right.
meantime, there was still a lot of interest in some ways, the friendlier, more reader friendly, I guess, Tolkien stuff, sort of Shannara, that kind of stuff. So my feeling is it was another good guess. The readership was there, based upon sales, and I don't think they did polling back then, but sales and whatever. And so then, instead of reprinting William Morris, they went ahead and published another sort of Shannara volume or something else. I can tell you that um, I had already written my Oran novels, so
Hmm.
around 70, I want to say summer of '79, this stuff really got going. And my agent at the time called me and said, everybody's buying a fantasy trilogy. We want you to outline a fantasy trilogy. I
Right.
mean, that's content. That's like, everybody's selling lemonade. We want your brand of lemonade.
Right.
Um,
What's your mix?
yeah, yeah, yeah. So I came up with something. There wasn't that much. I mean, it wasn't overwhelming then. So I came up with something that was really kind of a quasi historical thing. And I
Hmm.
used elements from mythology and stuff. And it's well written. I'm very proud of it. A lot of people like it. The few people who've read it, it pinnacle about it, and then it became completely forgotten because it's
Mm.
not the way that we think of fantasy trilogies now. The quasi medieval stuff. The fight
Hmm.
for the throne, maybe some romantasy thrown in. That's not at all what I did. So the direction I took was like a dead end.
Hmm.
Um, and so we see the direction that it wound up taking. And so my strong feeling is that I tend to think that the publishers, again, like feeding a bubble, like there had been much smaller one with Sword and Sorcery in the '60s, early '70s, and they fed it. And by gosh, they were right. There's so much of this. Look at Robert Jordan and everybody. So.
Right. Um,
Mhm.
so there's always this huge debate, and I think there was one just a few months ago about what makes a sword and sorcery story versus a fantasy or high fantasy story.
Yeah.
I think every author has their own take. Do you think that there's a unique ingredient to sword and sorcery, or there's several things that have to be considered?
In Sword and Sorcery, I'm sorry, yeah, you broke up a little bit, but yeah, is there something unique about Sword and Sorcery as opposed to high fantasy?
Yeah, do you think that there's
Absolutely,
a
positively, absolutely.
so
The
what
the
sorry go,
difference.
sorry, go on.
It says my connection's unstable. This is. Oh, it's okay. Let me let
Yeah.
me put it this way. It's largely a matter of scale
Hmm.
and temperament. Um, so I still think Sword and Sorcery works best in a short form. And I've written novels. I mean, a lot of people have written novels. But what it means in a short form is that you're more focused.
Mm.
And largely you're focused on one character, maybe a pair of characters. And the interest in those characters, those protagonists, is that they're rough around the edges. This
Mm.
starts with Conan and it goes on with Fritz Leiber and everybody. There may be other attributes to them that we kind of like, but we're probably going to be a little bit wary of them. Maybe they come from the wrong side of the tracks. Sword and Sorcery is really grounded,
Mm.
and it very quickly gets its boots dirty. You know what it's concerned with essentially is survival.
Right.
Now, the books that I'm writing about sword and sorcery fiction, I open up with these lines. Here's the opening lines. Um, it's the oldest story we have. There is a force, and we must confront it. And that's the opening line. So if you think about
Yeah.
it, that could be a demon, it could be a god, it could be a flood. However you want to personify it, it could be a sorcerer. But that's sword and sorcery. That's what it comes down to. That's where we are.
Right.
And we could be trapped. We could be set upon. We may go looking for trouble because we want a magic ring or a jewel or whatever. All those things are just stand-ins for human curiosity or greed or
Hmm.
nastiness or just get from here to there and something falls out from under our feet. And that's and the world building, is another aspect. The world building that comes in, we get just enough that we need. We're not building. I mean, I have maps and everything, but it's like we're not so concerned with this immersive world. Is the term that I use in the book that I'm writing. Um, we get just enough that we need. We know when we start the story, we're in a sword and sorcery setting. Just
Hmm.
like when you go to watch a Western or read a Western, you kind of got a feel for the territory already. All you need is just enough details to kind of put it in a specific place and time. And you get that as the story moves along. And that's sufficient for sword and sorcery, I feel. So it's those kind of stories. They're very much like Howard originally saying, he'd be sitting on the porch listening to some old timer who had fought the Comanches.
Right.
It's like in that setting, it's like, wow, tell me what happened, and that's the story you would get. So that's what sword and sorcery is. The focus on high fantasy is much more romantic with a large
Hmm.
R. It's expansive. It deals with a larger cast of characters. There's mixed motivations. Um, it could become a soap opera. It could become a tale of warfare and siege. Anything you want to do, but it's big and there's room for lots of players. Um, Sword and sorcery is very specific. It's in and out. It confronts danger. There has to be an element of weirdness, horror,
Hmm.
maybe some grim dark, something very unsettling because we need to deal with that ourselves in some ways. That's our world, whether we want to recognize it or not. So that's the stand-in for that. That's the car wreck. That's the person who died too young. That's the horror, of what happened down the street or something. And that's what we confront.
I
Yeah.
have to follow up because I was listening to you explain your view on it, and so many things were popping into my head.
Oh,
Um,
sorry.
one of my favorite authors is Glenn Cook, who came out in the '80s with The Black Company,
God, I love those
and
stories. Yes.
yeah, I such a great series and still so underrated.
Yeah.
One thing that I have to ask though is I remember about 10 years ago, especially when kind of grimdark fantasy, Mark Lawrence,
Mm-hmm.
Joe Abercrombie, those guys were really kind of making their stride on the scene.
Mm-hmm.
There was a lot of discussion about Glenn Cook, The Black Company, and a lot of those grimdark novels kind of the past being
Mm-hmm.
sword and sorcery novels. And they were kind of lumped in a little bit with sword and sorcery for a bit. Do you think that there was confusion for a little bit about what sword and sorcery was, and that became like, how do you feel about that term sword and sorcery being applied? And like, this is in no way diminishing Glenn or the
Oh
series
God,
in any
no.
way, but
Um,
what
yeah,
do you think about that?
I talk about it in my book because, first of all, I love his stuff. Um, but also because what we think of as sword and sorcery,
Hmm.
the edges are kind of, I think I use the phrase that the edges are flexible. They're not porous, but they're kind of flexible. And
Right.
so there's a number of other stories out there now, and some really good writers who are writing stuff that don't follow that very strict, pattern, that we just discussed. But if we allow a little bit of fluidity, yeah, okay, maybe you want to call it military, sword and sorcery or something,
Right.
something like that, whatever. That's okay. It's still delivering that kind of visceral thriller excitement, that a lot of us want in sword and sorcery. Um, I also make the distinction like between sword and sorcery and heroic fantasy. You
Mm.
know, to me, Howard stuff isn't heroic fantasy. I know it was a label for a long time. Nobody else knew what else to call it. we have some excellent heroic fantasy out there now. We have Howard Andrew Jones.
Yes.
We have
Rest
Adrian
in
Cole
peace.
has revived Elric. There's so much of
Right.
it now. Great stuff. Great stuff. Um, and some of it can have some weirdness to it. Some of it, but the characters are essentially in their heart of hearts, no matter how brutal they can get. They're good people. They're
Hmm.
they're there for a cause larger than themselves. And the sword and sorcery character, that's not necessarily true. Doesn't mean they're particularly hateful or anything. They're a little bit rough. They're not they're not there on the scene to be something noble. If that
Mm.
happens, it's peripheral. Conan saves the girl falling over the cliff rather than grab the treasure. Something
Right.
like that in the one story. Um, so it can be kind of peripheral and stuff. But to me, that's a fine distinction. Um, I have no trouble allowing Glenn Cook in there, allowing heroic fantasy to be there.
Hmm.
The one complaint I have now is that nobody seems to know that what they're calling sword and sorcery now is so vast that it's
Hmm.
just about meaningless. There's a list on what was it? Amazon or someplace? Somebody had list your favorite sword and sorcery. They had romanticides. They had
Right.
all kinds of stuff. Anything with a person with a sword. Oh, that must be sword
Yeah.
and sorcery. No, no, that's not at all. It's something larger than that. It's something limited.
Right.
So yeah,
Absolutely. I think Dritz was on that list, and I love Bob Salvatore and all of those books, but like
yeah. I
Dritz,
haven't read those yet, but yeah, yeah,
it, they're more heroic fantasy, but I
yeah.
think that they bend that edge towards epic.
Okay,
Um, but as you said, the bounds are so wide now. Um,
yeah.
So, tying our discussion of sword and sorcery into sometime lofty towers, one topic that I see still rearing its head among authors, and you mentioned this previously, and readers as well, is the idea of clone-ins, which are copies
Mm-hmm.
or alternative expressions of the clone character. I
Yep.
noticed that there's a lot of Elfrics out there. I
Okay.
think that there's also a lot of Fafhrd and
Elfric, I
Grey.
like that. Yeah,
I think that there's a lot of Fafhrd and Grey Mauser takes that are appearing now, which I
yeah.
think some of them are actually pretty good. Um,
Someone continued with a couple stories in the Magician's Skull mag. They're good.
yeah.
Yeah.
What do you think sets Hanlon apart from your typical SNS hero? And were there any tropes of the genre that you tried to avoid in this novel or wanted to confront head on?
Um, I hope that none of the sword and sorcery characters that come up, and maybe there are ones, Oren's kind of heroic, are flat out clonins. I don't want them to be
Right.
that. I want them to have more depth. I think it goes back to the fact that early on I really liked movies a lot. I thought I was going to end up studying cinema. I like drama. I like
Hmm.
dialogue. I like
Hmm.
character. Could an actor play, Hanlon? Um,
Substance.
yeah, substance. See, and that's not always necessary for a story. It's like watching a Roger Corman movie. You don't have to be that deep. We're just there for the fun. It's okay.
Right.
Thrill me. That's sufficient. But just because of my nature as the person I am and as a writer, I'm not satisfied with just leaving my characters at that level. I want there to be more. Um, so I guess short answer, that's where Hanlon comes from. I also made him. I mean, he has some real depth. I mean,
Hmm.
he's a man of many parts. Um,
Deeply educated.
deeply educated,
Yeah.
loves poetry. He's a very intelligent man. Um, like a Doc Holliday or somebody. I mean,
Hmm.
and as deadly with the sword as anybody that you can imagine. That's just his makeup. He's kind of a unique person in that way, and burdened with some great remorse and doubt and anger and fury at incidences that happened in his past. Um, he would like to confront them. Is there going to be any way to do that? How does he settle himself with these memories? I noticed that that's what Oliver, is making that a tagline and promoting the book. Is it the way? How do we leave the past behind?
Right.
How was my father able to leave the past behind? He could not. He
Right.
could not. He held on to it and was rigid. If there's a way for Hanlon to let go of it, I had to try to find that. So,
If I make may make a comparison of Hanlin. I'm a big Charles Saunders fan, and
Oh God.
I
Oh
actually
yeah.
saw that there was a lot of, I think there's a lot of comparison between Amaro and Hanlon in terms of how deeply reflective they are and introspective they are, not only of like their actions and who they are as characters, but of the actual setting themselves. I think one thing that Saunders did very well, and I think that you do extremely well, is like you've said previously, give those characters that depth and substance. And I think that's one thing that, Sword and Sorcery sometimes gets, I think our aesthetic sometimes gets mistaken and people don't see the substance underneath. And I think the beauty of sometimes Lofty Tower is that Hanlon has so much substance to him.
Mhm. I I will take it as a badge of honor that you compare Hanlon to Amaro. I don't know how many people know. I suppose a lot of people know it, but Charles and Saunders and I we never met, but we were friends for more than 40 years.
Yeah.
In '79, he wrote me a kind of a fan letter. Before I got a chance to write him a fan letter.
Oh, that's
So
cool.
yeah, oh yeah. So in fact, I was able to save all the letters from him that I got over the years. Toward the end, it was more like emails, but I kept copies of those too. And there's a fellow up in Nova Scotia, John Tatry. He worked with Charles on the paper up there.
Hmm.
They worked on, and he's doing the biography of Charles. So I was able to send him, for his reference, all those letters and everything. I'm sorry that we never met. We talked on the phone a couple of times, but we talked about so many things in those letters. And he helped me through some rough patches. I helped him through a couple rough patches. I'm sure not the only one. I mean, he had a
Hmm.
wide, I hope it was a wide circle of friends. I know that he had friends who supported him and loved what he was doing. But yeah, it means a lot to me, and depth of characterization, where our characters come from. Those things meant a lot to us. I mean, he had to deal with a lot of things in his life. A
Hmm.
lot of that went into Amaro. And what really ticks me off is that he didn't get the attention he deserved until much later. And even that wasn't sufficient. He went to his grave, and then people like, oh, he was a great writer. There were a few of us who knew. He had his circle of admirers. But I
Right.
mean, here's Kane, here's Elric. I mean, why aren't we talking about Amaro at the same time? And
Absolutely.
I don't have an answer. I don't have a good answer.
And Dosway as well. I think he wrote some really great characters just outside of Amaro as well that
Isn't she great? Isn't she a great character? Yeah.
yeah. Oh, I'm hoping that one day someone gets around to doing, maybe Milton over at MV
Mm-hmm.
Media gets around to it, but I really do think a collection. I know there's a third Amaro book that hasn't hit the market yet. I know there's two that
There were
are out
three.
there, but there were three.
There
I've
were
never
three.
seen the third, but
The
I hope.
Trail of Bohu. Have you
Yeah.
heard of that? That's the third one. Um,
Okay.
yeah, you might be able to track it down online and use copy or something. I don't know if it's been brought out again or not. I was around able to buy all three of them in the DAW editions, and then he revised them for some later editions. So yeah, if you were lucky enough to be there, you got them. Um, but yeah, he had plans for a fourth. I don't know if it was ever written. I'm not sure,
Oh wow.
but
Okay.
he didn't want to continue with the character. I mean, he got bummed out after a while. He really got depressed for a while. It's like nobody's paying attention. It's like, well, I know, just because they're jerks, they're not paying attention.
Right.
Maybe they're racist. I don't know. Situation is. But I'm very glad that he's finally getting his due. It's too late for him to appreciate in person, but he's out there somewhere and he knows what's going on. I'm sure he deserves it.
Absolutely.
Yep.
So this is a bit of an exploratory question. I actually had to go
Mhm.
back and rewrite this a few times,
Okay.
especially since we recently had a Red Sonja trailer come out for a future film.
I just saw that. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
you co-authored seven, correct me if I'm wrong, seven Red Sonja novels
It
with
was
Richard
six. It was
Six.
six. Yeah. Yeah. Dick
Okay,
Tierney and I.
Richard Tierney,
Right.
during a period in the 80s where the character arguably achieved her best accolades during that period of publishing, which was also in thanks to Roy Thomas and Barry Windsor over at Marvel Comics. Um,
Absolutely. Yeah.
Given that we have a new film on the way and the fierce debate that often surrounds Red Sonja, What do you think is needed to translate that character to new readers and new viewing audiences in 2025?
What Dick and I tried to do, and I say this together because we kind of shared responsibility here.
Hmm.
Way back in the day, I was a young writer then, in my late
Hmm.
20s, mid late 20s, and I could sit down at the typewriter and just start banging the keys and come up with scenes and dialogue and characters and just go for broke. Dick preferred to write. Um, he preferred to take that and then mold it.
Hmm.
So I could send him stuff. He was really got to just, if he could have spent his whole life just living in a library reading books, he would have done it, you know.
Right.
He did feel compelled to
Paradise.
write. Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's heaven,
Yeah.
man. I mean, we know he came up with some really good stories and verse and his character, the sort of Spartacus, I mean, um, uh, Simon of Gitta. Um,
Hmm.
where our Red Sonja was coming from was from the period where most of the stuff was being written by fans or by young authors in fanzines.
Hmm.
You dream of getting published by even by a Zebra Books or anybody. I mean, so it's the last tail end of that wonderful period that still had a little bit of that glow of the pulp era to it. I mean, a lot of
Hmm.
the same people working then had worked in the pulps. They just went across the street and worked for a paperback house instead of pulp publisher. Um, so there is still a little bit of that in there. We took it. I know we wanted to create a character who was really solid. Again, we go back to characterization. Boots on the ground. She had to have an inner life. I mean, she really knew herself. Um, and I'll take a little bit of credit for that because I really wanted her to be a strong, kick-ass woman. I really did.
Right.
I'd say go out, find some red-haired country girl in Ohio where I come from, and give her a sword.
Right.
So um, the Sonja now, and if I understand correctly, this is like the second or third generation of a Sonja character or something.
Yes.
This is coming to us. The thing I fear about the movie, and I sure hope I'm wrong. We're now at a point with sword and sorcery and action films. They've been so influenced, I think, by video games,
Hmm.
by a lot of superficial stuff, that I saw the trailer and I kind of groaned inside. Sonja does this bit. She climbs a wall and then does this flip in the air while she shoots an arrow. Please
Yeah.
don't do that. Please
No.
don't do that.
Don't ever do that. Don't
Yeah,
ever
don't
do
ever do
that.
that. Have her stand on the ground and fight a guy with a sword and shoot it from where they're both full length the way they used to in the old days. Where people really learn the choreography. It looks like there's a lot of action in it, which is good, and the actress playing her looks good. I mean, she looks.
Yes.
I think so. I think she looks good. But if there's too much real softness to it in the sense of the what's the word I'm looking for? Where you're the conception of it. We got to have a sword fight every 10 minutes. You
Right.
know, it's going to be pure good guy versus bad guy or good Sonja versus bad. No, 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 no. Don't do that. The setting creates the characters. It's like with a good
Hmm.
Western. We know who
Hmm.
they are. They're going to have some
Yes.
depth to them, and they can have their own backstory. But the setting creates a situation, and if it's going to be faux medieval or something, that's okay. Just make it feel kind of realistic. I know people have a lot to say about the Conan the Barbarian movie with Arnold Schwarzenegger, the first one that John Milius made. But
It's a
my friend Ted,
masterpiece.
it's a masterpiece. I like it,
It's a
man. I
no,
do.
I think
I agree.
now even I think now later on it's been looking people are looking back at it now and
Yeah,
realizing how good of a film it was.
I wrote a long essay on it back in the '90s because I appreciated it so much. You can find it online. This John
Hmm.
Milius' Conan the Barbarian or something. But I remember when I went to see it. Ted Rappel in Cleveland, who wrote the Ganji series. You ever heard of that? He's like samurai warrior. He's half Scandinavian, half samurai. Fights demons in Transylvania. I won't give it all away. Um,
I'm
but
gonna
there was a
find
bunch of.
that.
Oh man, there's a bunch of us in Youngstown, Ohio. I live in Youngstown. Ted's up in Cleveland. We got in somebody's car. I don't know. We got in Rick's car and we got up and we gathered Ted and we went because it was the pre-release showing of Conan. And we went to see it, and we didn't get there in time, and it sold out. We didn't know they were going to replay it again the next night, so we had to wait to see it come out in the theater, you know. So when I finally saw it, the point of my story is when I finally saw it, and then I went up and visited Ted. I didn't remember this. He said, "You were ecstatic. You said, Dave, this is what it really looked like." And that's the set design, it's the feeling, it's
Yes.
the boots on the ground. And they took great, I mean, they had Ron Cobb doing the you know, set design and everything, you know, it was great. But that's what it looks like. It's not, you know, hardware you got from the store or some beat up armor left over from a TV show or something. It feels like a real world that people are in. It's been around for a while, and nobody's grandstanding. It's not, you know, I'm the bad guy. I'm going to do everything evil for no reason whatsoever, except that, you know, I'm just going to do it. It's really got to have that core feeling that I'm fighting to survive. There's something really horrible right around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
How the hell am I going to get out of this? If I have to kill that guy, I'm going to do it. That's
Right.
it. It's that simple. So it looks like there's elements of that in there. We shall see. They got to get 90 minutes or 120 minutes out of it. You know, we'll see. We'll see what happens. So, but I just dislike that superficial stuff. I really do.
Right. Well, like I think you hit on something too earlier on where, I think one thing that people are appreciating about Milius's film now is that there's a real psychological base to it, and there's a
There
real
is.
philosophical base to it as well. It's not only that Conan has to find this grit to survive
Yeah.
this Hyperborean landscape that he
Yep.
constantly travels over,
Yep.
but
Yep.
he his developing view through the film versus Thulsa Doom, who has this hard definition of power versus what Conan had.
Right.
I think we're all now realizing that that film had that kind of depth to it. I my hope with Sonja, and as you say, we're into multiple generations of the character's presentation
Yep.
now.
Yeah.
I think the thing that's missing a little bit from the character's presentation has always been a little bit of that psychological and philosophical
I agree.
depth
That's a good
to it.
point. I agree. Yeah.
Well, like you can have I think the film I think the trailer looks beautiful. I think it looks a little bit
Mm-hmm.
like The Witcher from Netflix, but
Mm-hmm.
I think it's beautiful. And like you said, besides all the kind of CGI action and the weird flip, like she
Mm-hmm.
looks great.
Oh, she looks good.
I I just hope that there is a philosophical depth there where that character gets to say something. And I think that's something that happens in Sometime Lofty Towers. Hanlon gets to say multiple things about his situation, about the
Thank you.
world,
Yeah.
and about
Yeah.
himself as well.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so
Go ahead.
one final question, and again,
Sure.
thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, absolutely.
What makes working with Brackenbury Books so exciting? Oliver and his team have done such a
Uh,
great job with New Edge, Sword and Sorcery Magazine, Double Edge Sword and Sorcery, and more releases. But it must be wonderful to be selected as their first novel-length release. Can you speak
it
on
is.
how the process has been working with them, and just, let give us a peek from how things have gone behind the scenes? Again, you
Well,
guys
he's
funded a very successful backer kit campaign, so
yeah. I mean, it's like I've never done or been part of anything like that before, so that was an
right.
education for me. It, by apparently, by all accounts, it's gone very, very well. You know, this is
Yes.
really good. So I mean, I credit Oliver for that. He knows what he's doing. He initially, this a few years ago. I mean, he initially got hold of me. You know,
Hmm.
I'm starting like the talk of New Age sword and sorcery. You know, contemporary sword and sorcery been around. So he took it upon himself, and it's like I'm gonna start a zine. Let's see what happens. And that's where he presented it to me. And apparently he approached a number of writers, and he approached me. You want to write something? And yeah, and so I came up with two characters and kind of put them on the road together, put them in a situation, and he liked it. And he's found so many good writers,
Right.
since then. Um, he is a very literate man with an artistic vision.
Hmm.
He really appreciates the genre, and can see the potential in it. Now, you can't ask for a better mix than that if you're dealing with an editor, an agent, a publisher. I mean, I speak from experience. I've had to
Right.
deal with struggle blockheads, you know. So he's wonderful, and he's genuine. He's sincere. It goes back to money. We all want to make some money. We all, I don't, he's like, I don't want him to go poor doing this. You can't do it for nothing, But he's balancing all that, with genuine love and understanding of the genre,
Hmm.
keeping an eye, for what's going to work, what's not going to work. Um, I fully understand that. I mean, he is taking a chance, or he was taking a chance, in doing this book of mine. Um, there are probably more people who like are familiar with my name than I realize. Um,
Hmm.
but I don't think I'm a big shot or anything, So he's taking a little bit of a chance, I mean, with this guy, and particularly this book, um, which he dearly respects. I really like. He gets it. What I was going after. Um, he is a joy to work with. I hope he'll keep the door open for me for more projects in the future. Um, but
Absolutely.
anything he wants, I'll be there and I'll help him with it. I'll work with him on it. So he's great. I like him a lot. It's great.
David, thank you so much for joining me, and thank you so much for this interview. It's a rare pleasure to get I don't know how you look at yourself, but me and a lot of readers of Sword and Sorcery kind of look at you as a very underappreciated legend. And I have to say, I'm very, very excited about Sometime Lofty Towers coming out because
Thank you.
I think people are going to realize how great you are at this genre because it really is a fantastic book. I've always told people that Sword and Sorcery just needs those few books to come out that show people that like there's such deep substance to this
I
that
agree.
I compare Sword and Sorcery to Kurosawa a lot, where
Sure. Absolutely.
the aesthetic is so powerful, the imagery is so
Yeah.
powerful, but the imagery is on top of this deep well of substance and meaning and
Yes.
philosophy. And I think if Sword and Sorcery just gets its feet under it and is able to present that, we're off to the races with everyone else.
Man, I absolutely agree. And thank you for mentioning Kurosawa because holy cow. I mean, anybody who writes sword, I mean, you got to watch Kurosawa many
Mysteries,
times
yeah.
over. Yeah. Yeah.
To
Just
a certain
remarkable
extent,
stuff.
if you appreciate westerns, you should watch
Yeah.
Kurosawa. Like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's such a wonderful director.
Oh, it's great, such great stuff. So, thank you very much for what you say about me and my fiction, though. I really appreciate that. I genuinely do. Thank you.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you so much for joining me, and I'll let you go from here.
Okay.
But thank
Thanks.
you so much again, and I hope we run into each other down the road or and speak again soon.